Imagine a combat system whose whole goal is to make the mundane amazing, where you as a fighter can release waves of cutting magic reminiscent of scenes you may be familiar with in gaming. You could take on the aspect of a great lion with primal magic, call upon small bits of divine power of the god you worship, or utilize techniques that give you the feeling of performing ancient skills passed down for dozens of generations. You can do all of these while maintaining your general vibe as a martial character, allowing you to insert a little bit of the fantastical into the mundane, shaking up the typical monotonous turn of I run up and I attack again, and if you're a fighter, you attack and attack again at higher levels, of course. However, in today's video, I'll be presenting you a system which allows you to close that weird low fantasy gap that martials have in relation to everything else. Not to make them necessarily high fantasy, you're not going to be flying around casting fireballs, but to bring the power fantasy element they provide to a more mid fantasy level, without having to choose a subclass that does it for you. The goal of the system itself is to give you, the player, something cool to do, and in some cases, a strategic tool you can add into your arsenal in order to make those turns where you're just hitting the thing until it dies a little less normal, a little less typical for your regular D&D encounter. I know I mentioned something about your subclass providing you with your fantasy, so let me explain what I mean by that. In D&D, typically your class can be a defining measure of the upper limit of your player fantasy. Basically, how far can your character go on their own merit alone in terms of this high fantasy world that they inhabit? You have classes like Champion and Battlemaster, which I would consider to be on the lower scale of the type of fantasy it provides, whereas classes like Eldritch Knight and the biggest culprit, Psy Warrior, give the player an immense feeling of progression in player fantasy because fundamentally speaking, the way in which the class plays gives you a unique sense of power as you continue to progress throughout your levels. Whereas with the Champion or Battlemaster fighter subclasses, you're more or less doing the same exact thing with a couple sprinkles on top into your 20th level. This sense of progression between subclasses to some extent feels off, at least to me. And the reason I've picked this particular fight is because I wouldn't want a player of mine looking over a particular subclass in order to solely play these high player fantasy subclasses because they feel like their character's potential story is determined by their initial choice in class and subclass. For instance, if you're going to play a warlock, you're probably going to have to do some stuff that deals with your patron. Got a fiend patron? Well, I guess you gotta descend to the depths of hell and slay that fiend to free your soul. Got a great old one pact? Well, I guess you gotta descend into the oceans for an epic sea battle against the being that binded your soul to the salt. Got a Archfey pact? Well, time to have an epic battle of wits against a crazy old hag called Vestoria of the 100 Tongues. You see the point, right? These are all elements of story that essentially come along with the subclass selected itself, meaning that as a player you are intrinsically getting a high fantasy experience where your character will end up in a quote-unquote epic scenario. But the same can't be said for all classes across the board, and to some people they may not care, but I do. You see, I wanted to create a type of structure where no matter what you picked, your potential was limitless. And in that, no matter what class you pick, you're tied to some type of power which connects you with the narrative world around your character in one way or another, allowing for all characters within a given world, a given group, a given party to have that high fantasy potential even if they themselves can't cast any magic. In my system called the Mythic Founts of Power, you're able to select one of 4 different sources of power, and depending on your choice, this will allow your character to connect to one of 4 different types of magic on a fundamental level, giving you more to work with when trying to connect your character to the wider world. They would have some core knowledge of magic, even if it's just rudimentary things. To which I have a brief video on over my channel for those interested in knowing a little bit more about all of this after you're done here. And from there, after you've picked your Mythic Fount of Power, You would therein go into my battle art system if you are a more martial-oriented character. This is a system inspired by the Ashes of War from Elden Ring. You'll have one of 4 different category feature sets that you can choose from. I actually have a video about every single one in this video here, which if you're curious about, I highly recommend watching, as that'll give you most of the context needed for some of the things discussed in this video here. And something to keep in mind is that this video only goes over 4 out of the 80 potential options across the 4 different magic types available to you in the full feature-rich battle art system over on my Patreon, created by yours truly. You can find a bunch of other cool Patreon exclusive content there, like my Binding Vow system for spells, the Mythic Fount system spoken about here in this video, or even content pertaining to my Fallout-inspired post-apocalyptic fantasy setting where Celestials quote-unquote save the world by partially cleansing humanity from it. However, this isn't a video about that. We're here to talk about the battle art system, so we're gonna go ahead and get into that. So, for our first battle art, we'll be going over a really simple one called Spire. Essentially, you extend your Arcane Soul to a space you can see within 30 feet of you and cause the ambient magic to grow unstable until it explodes in a misty azure pillar of magic. Mechanically, you're selecting a 5-foot space and making whoever's in it hurt a lot. It deals XD8 force damage, with X equaling your proficiency bonus, which may seem kind of interesting. The reason why I chose to balance not only this battle art, but the other 79 that I created, is because I wanted to make a system that had perpetuity, meaning that it would effectively always be useful to the player. But not only that, the battle arts you learn become stronger alongside your character, meaning that they truly aren't ever weak, per se. They will always match a particular level of strength in relation to your tier of gameplay, so in other words, they scale with you throughout your adventures, giving you that meaningful sense of progression that I was talking about earlier. This and the rest of the battle arts featured in this video are my more mid-tier set, where you sort of begin to step into a more high fantasy magic realm with what the battle arts can do and accomplish. You might even see that the strongest of them within this tier resemble spells, almost. Seeing as my first batch were to basically set up the lower end of what's possible with this system, my next batch would be another 40, totaling out the system to 120, and those will include more higher level ideas which will have more eccentric elements to them to really bring up that I'm doing really big cool things as a guy with a cool sword and magic. Moving on to our second battle art, and one that's a bit more fantastical, we have the Touch of Eth's Storm Call. You reach into the world's magic beneath you and conjure a localized storm which surrounds your form, sending bolts of lightning outward to creatures within a 5-foot radius around you. This battle art deals XD4 lightning damage to said creatures if they fail a Constitution saving throw. It also lasts for 1 minute until dismissed or until you're knocked unconscious. The essential idea I really wanted to reinforce with the Touch of Eth with this more recent batch was a warrior that calls upon the world's magic to perform feats only such a connection could provide. Being able to call upon the winds, the storm, and the world itself to give the player a greater sense of feeling connected to nature in a more meaningful way. They may not only just be outlanders who learn or survive the wilderness, but the world itself grants them this connection that only they and others like them can understand. This also opens the gateway for your archetypal druids and rangers to have conversations with other characters outside of their spheres who may connect to the same magic source, albeit in a very different manner. Continuing on to our third battle art of this video, we have the Divinius Shard, and here things get a little interesting in this batch of divine flavored battle arts. You see, I included sections where you essentially call to a particular deity for their power. This is in line with how the Divinius Shard functions in my world, as a type of lighthouse adrift in the abyss of the night sky to shine and hopefully catch the attention of your intended deity. This battle art is called Binding Prism, where you attempt to call upon the power of the god of magic from your respective world. However, in mind, it is called the Exalted One. And essentially, after a little wisdom saving throw from your target creature, you bind them in a magic barrier that takes the shape of a prism. The prism does have hit points and can be destroyed from the inside by the trapped creature or from the outside by creatures that are around them. This may sound really powerful to put in the hands of, well, anyone, but that's okay. The slot cost is high enough to where you wouldn't really be able to use this until you're at least 8th level. I do find that this is a really nice battle art to be paired with characters who may enjoy finding non-combative solutions to the issues that they're faced with. You could also trap an ally or yourself within the barrier to protect them from incoming AoEs or attacks, if they need a moment's respite, like for instance to drink a health potion on their following turn. Moving on to the last battle art of our video, we have the Inner Wellspring, and its battle art called Eagle Dive. I'll be honest with you guys, I just wanted to create the infamous Dragoon Dive from Final Fantasy games that I've grown up playing. The fantasy of leaping into the sky with a polearm and flying directly into another creature with that sort of elegant smoothness is something I really wanted to create, with the idea of techniques being passed down. I often think, what types of attacks would one perform to fight flying enemies in a high fantasy setting? And this was a natural result of that. Also, sidebar. Let me just say, it's an absolute travesty that they took Ki out of D&D 2024. I, for one, love the idea of martial arts and that sort of mysticism having a place within D&D. So I, for one, will probably keep moving it forward with all of these concepts in mind. I'll probably talk deeper about this subject in a future video because I have some things to say, but I just wanted to talk about it right now because it was fresh on my mind. Getting back to our battle art, essentially, Eagle Dive performs exactly how you think it would. You leap to a space you can see within 30 feet of you, plunging your polearm into the ground before ripping it up in the ground beneath you in an omnidirectional attack. Here is where things get fun though. It deals XDY slashing damage, with X equaling proficiency bonus and Y equaling the hit die tier of the weapon you're using. I made it this way as to allow the player to use this battle art with any polearm in their possession, if it be a javelin or a lance. I wanted to really diversify the potential mental imagery that comes along with something like this, as that's what the system is all about. Spicing up the turn-by-turn gameplay with something really cool and kind of special to your character that'll set them apart from the others. And also to give you something to think about on your turns other than walking up and hitting the guy. I've always found it a little odd how people who play martial classes are almost put in this position where they intrinsically play the least engaging role in all of D&D, when it should be one of the most exciting roles to take on, seeing as you're right up close to the action. My personal philosophy is that everyone engaging with the game should have their own list of priorities or a sort of challenge that comes along with using their very tools to their full potential, which in turn makes anyone feel good because they're able to creatively express their skill in a way that contributes to their enjoyment of the narrative that they're a part of. However, with our final battle art out of the way, we've come to the conclusion of our video here. I sincerely hope that you all enjoyed the video. Leave a like to help a guy get seen by the algorithm, but also if you'd like to see more of the various magic systems of my world and how I go about implementing them as systems, seeing as I still have 4 more types of magic I haven't even spoken about. You can go over to my Patreon to find the full feature-rich system there, which includes what is now 80 different options across the various magic sources within my world. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to follow my journey as I bring my fantasy worlds to life. And with that, my friends, I'll be seeing you in the next one.